The Sterling showroom in downtown Los Angeles shimmered beneath thousands of white lights. Wealthy investors, luxury car collectors, and reporters filled the massive hall, all waiting for one moment: the rebirth of the legendary Sterling Raven V12. At the center of the stage sat the silver-black coupe that hadn't started in 18 years. For Lisa Sterling, this night meant everything. The Raven 512 had once belonged to her late father, Henry Sterling, the legendary founder of Sterling Motors heritage. Tonight, she planned to prove to the world that his legacy still lived through her. If the engine roared back to life, a $90 million investment deal would save her struggling company. But when the engineer turned the key, nothing happened. The first attempt ended with a dry, metallic click. The second only flickered weak dashboard lights before silence returned. By the third failed attempt, the entire showroom had fallen painfully quiet. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Investors exchanged doubtful looks. Some guests tried to hide their smirks. Across the room, William Crawford, a board member secretly waiting for Lisa to fail, smiled to himself. Near the edge of the stage stood a tall mechanic in a faded denim shirt, holding the hand of his 6-year-old daughter. His name was Anthony Walker. He wasn't invited to the gala. He had only been hired to move cars for the event. Beside him, little Matilda clutched a tiny silver toy car against her chest. As the silence grew heavier, Anthony quietly muttered under his breath, "That engine isn't dead, it's locked out of sequence." Lisa heard him, humiliated, desperate, and surrounded by people waiting for her downfall. She made a terrible mistake. She stepped toward Anthony and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Start the engine, and I'll date you." The room exploded with laughter. Some guests laughed openly. Others whispered cruel jokes behind champagne glasses. Cameras turned toward the mechanic in worn boots standing under the spotlight of public humiliation. But Anthony didn't react. He simply covered his daughter's ear gently with his hand, so she wouldn't hear the mocking voices around them. Matilda lowered her eyes toward the marble floor, trying not to cry. That moment changed everything. Because what nobody in that showroom knew was that Anthony Walker understood old engines better than anyone alive. And before the night was over, the man they laughed at would make the entire room stand and applaud. If you enjoy emotional stories about respect, redemption, and unforgettable moments, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful English stories every week. The laughter still echoed softly through the showroom as Anthony Walker stood beside his daughter, near the edge of the stage. Matilda kept her eyes lowered, clutching her little silver toy car tightly against her chest. She had been so excited that morning. On the drive to Los Angeles, she had talked non-stop about seeing beautiful vintage cars for the first time in real life. Now she wished they had never come. Anthony looked down at her small, trembling hands and felt something heavy settle inside his chest. He had spent years protecting his daughter from moments exactly like this. He knew how wealthy people looked at men like him, men with rough hands, men whose clothes smelled faintly of oil and steel, men who fixed things instead of owning them. But Matilda was still too young to understand that kind of cruelty. Anthony crouched beside her and gently adjusted the collar of her navy coat. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered softly. "We can go home." He meant it. He was ready to leave the showroom, the laughter, and the humiliation behind. Because Anthony Walker had never cared much about pride. After his wife Sarah died in a highway accident 2 years earlier, pride had become far less important than being home in time to pack school lunches, help with homework, and read bedtime stories. Before the accident, Anthony had been known in restoration circles across Oregon as one of the most gifted mechanics around. He could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Old collectors often drove hundreds of miles just to let him work on their cars. But after losing Sarah, everything changed. Big contracts required travel. Travel meant leaving Matilda behind. So Anthony quietly turned down opportunity after opportunity. Instead, he repaired delivery trucks, farm equipment, and broken engines in small towns work that paid less, but allowed him to stay beside his daughter. And to Anthony, that mattered more than success. Matilda suddenly looked up at him, her eyes glossy with held-back tears. "Daddy," she whispered carefully, "Mom said you could fix anything." Anthony froze. For a brief second, the noise of the showroom disappeared completely. He could hear Sarah's voice again, as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "Your daddy doesn't fix cars with his hands," she used to tell Matilda with a smile. "He fixes them by listening." Anthony swallowed hard. If he walked away now, nobody in this room would remember him tomorrow. But Matilda would remember. She would remember that her father knew the truth and still left when people laughed at him. And Anthony could not allow his daughter to carry that lesson for the rest of her life. Slowly, he stood up. The laughter around the showroom had already begun fading, but several guests were still smirking behind champagne glasses. Lisa Sterling remained near the stage, with her arms crossed, pretending confidence even as the pressure around her grew heavier by the second. Anthony turned back toward the platform with Matilda's small hand in his. The room gradually fell silent again as he walked forward. Then he stopped directly in front of Lisa. "I'll try," Anthony said calmly. His voice was quiet, but every person in the showroom heard it. "But not for a date." He glanced down briefly at Matilda before looking back at Lisa. "I'm doing this because my daughter still believes in me." And for the first time that night, nobody laughed. Anthony Walker stood silently beneath the showroom lights, while every eye in the room fixed on him. A mechanic in worn boots, a single father holding his daughter's hand, and somehow, the only person who believed the legendary Raven V12 could still come back to life. But what nobody realized was this. The real danger that night was never the broken car. It was the people waiting for Lisa Sterling to fail. Across the marble floor, William Crawford watched the scene carefully, his expression calm but calculating. For 2 years, he had quietly worked behind the scenes to take control of Sterling Motors' heritage, and tonight was supposed to be the final blow. If the Raven failed in front of investors, Lisa would lose everything. The company, the board, her father's legacy, maybe even her position as CEO. Near the front row, billionaire investor Clinton Avery slowly checked his watch again. His $90 million investment was the only thing keeping Sterling Motors alive. And he had made one condition painfully clear months earlier. He didn't want speeches. He didn't want promises. He wanted proof. If Lisa could not bring her father's most famous car back to life in front of the world, then Sterling heritage no longer deserved to survive. Lisa knew it. That was why fear was beginning to creep beneath her polished confidence. As Anthony stepped toward the platform, whispers spread through the crowd again. "Who is this guy? He's just a mechanic. 3 engineering teams already failed. This is going to get even worse." But Anthony ignored every voice around him. He walked slowly toward the Raven 512 and stopped beside the silver-black coupe. Then, instead of opening the hood or asking for tools, he placed one rough hand gently against the front fender and listened. The room looked confused. One young technician near the back actually laughed. "Is he praying to the car?" A few guests chuckled nervously. But George Bennett, Sterling Heritage's senior engineer, and the only man in the building who had worked beside Lisa's father years ago, did not laugh, because he recognized what Anthony was doing immediately. That was not guessing. That was experience. That was the behavior of a man who had spent thousands of hours around old engines. Anthony tilted his head slightly. Then he spoke calmly. "Turn the key halfway," he said. "But don't crank it yet." The technicians exchanged uncertain looks. Lisa hesitated. For a brief second, the entire future of her company balanced on a decision that sounded completely ridiculous. Trust the experts, or trust a mechanic nobody respected 10 minutes ago. William stepped closer, immediately. "Lisa," he warned quietly, "if you allow this man to damage that car in front of investors, the company will never recover." The pressure around her tightened. Cameras waited. Investors watched. Board members whispered behind her. And standing near the edge of the stage, little Matilda stared at her father with absolute belief shining in her eyes. Lisa suddenly realized something painful. That child believed in Anthony more than Lisa had ever believed in herself. Anthony remained perfectly calm. No arrogance, no desperation, no need to impress anyone. Just patience. Finally, Lisa gave a small nod. The engineer turned the key halfway. A faint humming sound emerged beneath the dashboard for less than a second before disappearing again. Anthony's eyes narrowed immediately. "There," he said softly. "The engine isn't dead." The showroom became completely silent. Then Anthony looked up slowly at Lisa, and what he said next would shock every engineer in the room. "Your father hid something inside this car." If you're enjoying this emotional story of respect, hidden talent, and unforgettable redemption, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because what Anthony discovers next will leave the entire showroom speechless. Lisa stared at Anthony in disbelief. "Your father hid something inside this car." The words hung in the air like a secret finally escaping after 18 long years. Around the showroom, confusion spread instantly among the engineers and investors. What does that even mean? There's no hidden system in the restoration reports. We checked everything, but Anthony barely seemed to hear them. He slowly knelt beside the driver's seat and reached beneath the dashboard, moving his fingers carefully along the underside panel, as though he already knew exactly what he was searching for. George Bennett stepped closer, his breathing suddenly uneven, because deep in his memory, he heard Henry Sterling's old voice again. "A car with a soul ought to have a secret." George's eyes widened. "Oh my God," he whispered. Lisa turned toward him immediately. "You know something?" George nodded slowly, unable to hide the shock on his face. "Your father used to install mechanical anti-theft systems into his personal cars," he admitted quietly. "Systems hidden so well that only someone who truly understood the vehicle could find them." For the first time that night, Lisa looked at Anthony differently. Not as a worker, not as a stranger, but as someone who somehow understood her father's thinking better than the entire engineering department. Anthony suddenly stopped moving his hand. "There," he said softly, his fingers pressed against a nearly invisible panel hidden beneath the steering column. Even under the showroom lights, the compartment blended perfectly into the dashboard. Several engineers rushed closer. One of them looked stunned. "We never saw that." Anthony carefully slid the tiny panel open. Behind it sat a small brass lever, stiff from years of dust and dried oil. The entire room froze. Anthony explained calmly without looking up. "The Raven 512 doesn't start like a modern car. Your father designed a sequence lock into the ignition system." Lisa listened carefully. Almost afraid to breathe, Anthony continued. "First, the key must turn halfway to activate the auxiliary fuel pump. Then, the clutch must stay fully pressed while this hidden lever releases the secondary fuel valve. Only after fuel pressure stabilizes can the engine start." Silence swallowed the showroom. Every engineer standing nearby realized the horrifying truth at the exact same moment. The car had never been broken. They simply never understood how to ask it to start. William Crawford's expression darkened instantly. If Anthony was right, then everything William had planned for 2 years was about to collapse in front of everyone. But before Anthony could touch the lever again, William suddenly stepped forward sharply. "That's enough," he said coldly. "You are not touching that car again." The tension inside the showroom exploded, and for the first time that night, Lisa Sterling had to decide whose voice she would trust. William Crawford stepped between Anthony and the Raven 512, his polished voice suddenly sharp with authority. "That's enough," he repeated coldly. "This man is an unverified contractor. If he damages this vehicle in front of investors, Sterling Heritage will become a laughingstock." The showroom immediately filled with nervous whispers again. Some board members nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. But Anthony didn't argue. He simply stepped back from the dashboard and wiped the dust from his fingers with an old cloth from his pocket. "You have every right to stop me," he said calmly to Lisa. "But if you stop now, this car stays silent." His voice remained steady. "Not because it's broken, because nobody here has been patient enough to listen to it." Those words hit Lisa harder than she expected, because suddenly, she wasn't hearing Anthony anymore. She was hearing her father. "Old machines do not shout out their problems," Henry Sterling used to say. "You have to listen carefully." For years, Lisa had buried those memories beneath meetings, contracts, investors, and pressure. But tonight, standing beside the car her father once loved most, everything was returning. And standing at the edge of the stage was little Matilda, still holding her silver toy car with both hands, looking at her father with complete faith shining in her eyes. Lisa felt something painful twist inside her chest. That little girl never doubted Anthony for even 1 second. Meanwhile, Lisa had mocked him in front of 200 people. William stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "If this fails," he warned, "your career ends tonight." Lisa slowly lifted her eyes toward him. Then, for the first time all evening, her expression changed completely. "Let him finish," she said quietly. William blinked. "Lisa, let him finish." This time her voice carried across the entire showroom. The room fell silent instantly. Even the investors stopped whispering. William's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Anthony looked at Lisa carefully for several seconds. Then he said something nobody expected. "If I'm right about this," he glanced toward the driver's seat, "you should be the one to start the engine." Lisa stared at him in shock. "Me?" Anthony nodded. "Your father built this car. If it comes back to life tonight, the first person who hears it from behind the wheel should be you." For a moment, Lisa couldn't move. The Raven 512 suddenly no longer felt like a business asset. It felt like her childhood, like memories of standing beside her father in his garage, while the smell of oil and metal filled the air. Slowly, she stepped into the driver's seat. The old leather creaked softly beneath her, as emotion quietly broke through the polished mask she had worn for years. Anthony stood beside the open door, speaking gently. "Turn the key halfway first." Lisa obeyed. A faint hum emerged beneath the dashboard. "Now press the clutch all the way down." She did. Reach underneath and pull the hidden lever gently. Her fingers found the small brass tab. Click! The sound echoed through the silent showroom like the unlocking of something buried for 18 years. Anthony tilted his head slightly, listening carefully. 1 second. Nobody breathed. 4. Clinton Avery slowly stepped closer. 3. Anthony looked directly at Lisa. "Now start it." Lisa turned the key fully. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Just the dry, clicking sound of an old starter struggling against silence. William Crawford almost smiled. Several investors lowered their heads. And then, the engine exploded to life. A deep, thunderous roar shook the entire showroom. The chandeliers trembled. The marble floor vibrated beneath their feet. After 18 years of silence, the legendary Raven V12 was alive. And the next thing Lisa did shocked everyone in the room even more. The thunderous roar of the Raven 512 echoed across the showroom like a sleeping giant finally waking after 18 years. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The deep, powerful rumble of the engine filled every corner of the building, vibrating through the marble floor and crystal chandeliers above. Then the impossible reality finally hit the crowd. Anthony Walker had done it. The mechanic they mocked, the man security nearly threw out, had just succeeded where 3 professional engineering teams had failed. A wave of stunned applause suddenly exploded through the showroom. Reporters rushed forward with cameras. Investors stood from their seats. Even some board members who had doubted Lisa moments earlier now clapped loudly, pretending they had supported her all along. Near the front row, Clinton Avery slowly smiled for the first time that evening. Then he turned calmly toward his assistant. "Prepare the contract," he said. "We're proceeding with the investment." Across the room, William Crawford's face drained of color. Everything he had spent 2 years planning was collapsing right in front of him, and it had all been destroyed by a mechanic in worn boots. But the most emotional moment in the showroom didn't belong to the investors, or the applause, or even the car. It belonged to Matilda. The little girl suddenly ran across the marble floor and wrapped both arms tightly around Anthony's waist. "I knew you could do it, Daddy," she cried, her voice shaking with emotion. "I knew it." Anthony knelt immediately and held her close. For the first time all night, the exhaustion in his face disappeared. He pressed his forehead gently against hers and closed his eyes for a brief moment, breathing slowly as though something broken deep inside him had finally begun to heal. Lisa stood beside the still-running Raven V12, watching them silently, and suddenly, The success of the gala no longer felt important. Neither did the investors or the cameras, because standing in front of her was something far more valuable than business. A father who had protected his daughter's belief in him no matter how cruel the world became. Lisa slowly walked toward Anthony. The microphone attached to her dress was still on, meaning every person in the showroom could hear her next words. And this time, there was no arrogance left in her voice. "I was wrong about you," Lisa said quietly. The applause faded immediately into silence. She looked directly at Anthony. "I judged your clothes before I looked at the man wearing them." Her eyes lowered briefly. "And I humiliated you in front of everyone here." Then Lisa took a slow breath. "I'm truly sorry." The room became completely still, because honest apologies like that were far rarer than expensive cars. Anthony looked at her for several seconds. Then he gave a small, calm nod. "Thank you, Miss Sterling, but what happened after the gala ended would change both of their lives forever." Within less than 20 minutes, the entire atmosphere inside the Sterling showroom had completely transformed. What had nearly become the most humiliating night in Lisa Sterling's career was now being celebrated as a miracle. The Raven 512 continued rumbling proudly beneath the white showroom lights while reporters rushed to rewrite their headlines. Investors who had quietly prepared to leave were suddenly smiling again. And everywhere Anthony Walker went, people stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. But Anthony himself seemed completely uninterested in the attention. While photographers crowded around the restored car and executives celebrated the revived investment deal, Anthony quietly helped Matilda put her small navy coat back on near the edge of the platform. To him, the night had never been about money. It had been about his daughter, about protecting the belief she still carried in her heart. Across the room, Lisa watched him carefully. The more she observed Anthony, the more uncomfortable she became with herself, because Anthony had every reason to embarrass her now. He could have enjoyed watching the powerful CEO apologize publicly after mocking him in front of 200 people, but he didn't. There was no arrogance in him, no revenge, no desperate attempt to impress wealthy strangers. That calm humility unsettled Lisa far more than anger would have. Meanwhile, William Crawford slipped quietly toward the back exit of the showroom. His polished confidence was gone. The board members who had supported him earlier were no longer standing beside him. Some avoided eye contact completely. Others had already turned their attention back toward Lisa, now that the investment deal was safe again. For William, the night was over, and he knew it. Near the center of the showroom, Clinton Avery approached Lisa with a satisfied nod. "I underestimated you," the billionaire admitted calmly. Lisa almost answered honestly. "You underestimated Anthony." But before she could respond, her assistant hurried over with reporters requesting interviews and photographers demanding statements for the press. Lisa glanced once more toward Anthony, and to her surprise, he was leaving. No interview, no celebration, no attempt to take advantage of the moment. Anthony simply took Matilda's hand and headed quietly toward the service hallway leading to the parking area. Lisa hesitated only a second before following him. She removed her high heels while walking, carrying them in one hand as she moved away from the glamorous showroom and into the quieter employee corridor beyond the main event hall. The moment she entered the hallway, everything changed. The marble floors and camera flashes disappeared. Now there were only fluorescent lights, concrete walls, and the distant rumble of the Raven 512 still echoing faintly from the showroom. Anthony was kneeling beside Matilda again, carefully buttoning her coat. The sight hit Lisa unexpectedly hard, because for the first time all evening, Anthony no longer looked like the mysterious mechanic who saved her company. He simply looked like a tired father taking care of his little girl. "You were really going to leave without letting me thank you properly?" Lisa asked softly. Anthony finished adjusting Matilda's coat before answering. "I did the job I came here to do." Lisa shook her head immediately. "No," she said quietly. "You did much more than that." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lisa took a slow breath, and what she offered Anthony next would completely change the future of Sterling Motors' heritage, and perhaps both of their lives. Lisa stood quietly in the service hallway, still holding her high heels in one hand, while the distant sound of the Raven 512 echoed softly from the showroom behind them. Anthony finished buttoning Matilda's coat before finally looking up at her. For a brief moment, Nobody spoke. The glamour of the gala was gone now. No cameras, no investors, no applause, just a tired mechanic, his daughter, and the woman whose company he had just saved. Lisa took a slow breath. "I want you to work for Sterling Motors Heritage," she said carefully. Anthony remained silent. Lisa continued, "Not as a contractor, not as temporary help. I want you leading our restoration division." Even saying the words felt unreal to her. Just 1 hour earlier, she had publicly humiliated this man in front of an entire showroom. Now he was the only person she trusted with her father's legacy. "You'd have full authority over every major restoration project," Lisa added quickly. "A salary package, housing assistance, anything you need." Anthony listened calmly without interruption. Then he glanced down at Matilda, standing beside him. "My schedule belongs to my daughter," he said quietly. Lisa blinked slightly. Anthony continued, "I don't take work that keeps me away from her school plays, her dinners, or parent-teacher meetings." The hallway grew silent again, because Lisa suddenly realized something important. Anthony wasn't refusing the offer because he lacked ambition. He simply valued being a father more than success. Slowly, Lisa crouched down until she was eye level with Matilda. "Then we'll build the schedule around her," Lisa said softly. Matilda studied her suspiciously for several seconds, still not fully trusting the woman who had embarrassed her father earlier that night. Lisa smiled gently. "If your daddy works with my company," she promised, "his work will fit around your life, not the other way around." Matilda looked up at Anthony, then back at Lisa. And suddenly, with the fearless honesty only children possess, she asked, "Are you really going to date my dad?" The hallway froze. Anthony looked away immediately, hiding the faintest trace of amusement. Lisa, however, turned completely speechless. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO who negotiated million-dollar contracts without fear had absolutely no idea what to say. A light blush crept across her face before she could stop it. Anthony finally glanced toward her again. "That was your promise," he said calmly. "Not mine." Lisa slowly stood back up, and for the first time that night, she smiled naturally. "I'm a CEO," she replied softly. "I don't break promises." A quiet laugh escaped Anthony before he could stop it. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The first genuine laugh he had made in a very long time. Then his expression softened slightly. "Coffee," he said. Lisa tilted her head. "Coffee?" Anthony nodded once. No cameras, no investors, no reporters. Then he glanced down at Matilda. "And nobody laughs at my daughter." Lisa's expression changed instantly. The guilt in her eyes returned for just a moment before she gave a small, respectful nod. "Agreed." Together, the three of them walked slowly toward the parking lot. Behind them, the legendary Raven V12 continued, rumbling steadily beneath the showroom lights, no longer silent, no longer forgotten. For Lisa, the sound meant her father's legacy had finally returned. For Anthony, it was proof that his daughter's belief in him had never been wrong. And for little Matilda, it was the sound of an entire room standing up to applaud her daddy. But neither Anthony nor Lisa realized yet that this unexpected meeting inside a luxury showroom was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. If you enjoyed this emotional story about respect, redemption, and unexpected love, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful English stories every week. And tell us in the comments, if you were Lisa, would you have trusted Anthony before the engine started?